Hello, this is Randy with Excel for Freelancers, and welcome to the School Manager Part 18. In this week's training, I'm going to show you how to create these automated email notifications based on 7 different and unique triggers, along with dynamic variables for each trigger. It's going to allow you to create customized emails regardless of the trigger. It's going to be a great training. I've got so much, so let's get started. All right, thanks so much for joining me today on this incredible training, School Manager Part 18. We are nearing towards the end of this incredible series. This week, we're going to show you how to create this automated email notification system, complete again with dynamic variables. So for each different type of trigger, it's going to have its own set of variables. You're going to be able to create customized emails based on that. I'm going to create unlimited types of emails based on that. Also, we're going to be able to customize the send. Well, we can send these emails 1 minute, 10 minutes, 10 hours, 10 days, weeks, or months after the event is created. So it's completely customizable with customizable attachments, dynamic email to and CC fields, a lot to cover. So I want to get started right away on this. Of course, if you have not yet subscribed, now is a great time to do this. I create these training each and every Tuesday. All you need to do is just click the subscription button down below along with the notification icon. That'll ensure that you get these trainings in your email each and every week. If you do like these trainings, I've got this application completely free. All you need to do is click the links down in the description, either with your email or Facebook Messenger, and we're going to get this sent to you right away. Also, if you like creating these applications, I've got an incredible program called the Mentorship Program, where I'm going to teach you how to design, define, develop, and deploy your own Excel applications. It's a comprehensive training lasting over many months, but if you want to start now, you can do so for just $7. I've got an incredible promotion. I don't know how long that's going to be available for, so now is the time to join. It's just $7. That'll get you up to 5 weeks of training, all nearly 8 hours of training, and just for $7. So it's a great way to get started and see if you like it, if it's right for you. That link is down below as well. All right, let's get started. I've got a lot to cover on this training. This particular one, this is the sample. However, in this training, our actual one's going to be somewhat similar. We've been over this before. So this is what we're going to be doing. We're going to be able to select on that, and we're going to be able to display that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to save this. This is the sample. I'm going to put this away. Now, slightly different than what we've been doing before is I've been creating these screens live, but it's almost exactly the same, right? So there's no need to create this menu and this specific format again and again and again, right? Because you've seen that. So what I want to do is I want to share with you the unique properties of this particular screen, because there's a lot to cover on this. So for example, creating this menu, we've done that already. We did it with the students, teachers, schedule, classes, exams, and transactions. So there's no need for me to show you that again. So I did it already for you, right? We know how to do that already. And if you're not sure, all you need to do is just look back on the first 17 different episodes where we did a lot of that. Same thing with the formats here, same thing. So we don't want to try to duplicate what we've been doing, but we want to show you the unique qualities of this training. So that way this training is going to be only unique. There's less duplication, so you're learning more and more. So I'll try to prevent you from duplicating things. Sometimes the duplication does help learn things, but over and over again, I want to get you this particular training with email notifications. So much unique content that I want to show you. So I'm going to try to help it along. So this particular screen was created already for you, so to make things a little bit quicker and move things. But what I want to do is all the macros, all the automation, everything we're going to do live from scratch. So I'm going to take you step by step, every part of the way you're going to be learning, right? So let's get into it. So what do we want to happen? So basically a lot of things happen. I want to be able to create a new email, and I want that save that email in a database. That email database is going to look just like this. So we have multiple emails. We've got an email name and whether it's enabled. We've got a trigger. We've got an email to, CC to, we've got attachments, and the subject, the message, a send type, right? The send type, we'll go over that, the send quantity, frequency, before, after. So let's take a look at some of those things so we can see that. Okay, so we have a send. I want to either send immediately or I'm going to send it at a certain duration. So if I send it immediately, what I want to do is I've got conditional formatting, things that you're familiar with already in this training. So if we look down into the home and then conditional formatting, we see that we've created a rule based on whether E5 is send immediately. So it says send. So if it's send, let's just put send immediately. Let's just change that. Immediately, it does not equal send. Let's take a look. Immediately, then I want to change that to send. So that's all we want to do. And send, I'm going to put this to equals. So if it's send immediately, we can clear all that out. I'll just change that. I like that a little bit better. Otherwise, what we can do is we can just simply keep it the same. So if we're sending that, what we want to do is we want to make sure that we are going to change it. So that way, if we have send, it's the same thing, send immediately or send, it's going to clear it. I don't want it. So all we're going to say is send immediately when class is created. So otherwise, if you want to time it after, we can do send how many minutes after. So that's easy. So all we need to do there is create some drop-down list. And I've got a drop-down list here, data validation based on minutes, hours, days, and weeks. That allows us to schedule an email any specific point, 10 minutes, 10 hours, 10 days, weeks, whatever. So I've also got an email to field. Now this is really cool because we're going to be able to email it to the teachers, the students, and what I want to do is I want to have a list of variables. So we're going to call this variables, and I want those variables to be here. So this variable based on this. So for example, when I change this, I want that list of variables to change based on the trigger. In other words, a student created, it's going to have different variables. It can have a student name, it's going to have a student email, whereas a trigger called, let's say, teacher created would have different ones as well. So keep that in mind, we have different. So what are those triggers? Let's just go over some of those triggers now. When a new class is created, I want to be able to send an email. An option, of course, if it's enabled. If it's disabled, we won't. If a student is created, I want to send an email possibly. If a teacher is created, if a transaction is created, if a student is enrolled in a class, I want to send an email based on that. If a score is assigned, I also want to send something based on that. You don't want to score. Remember, when we're in the schedule, when we assign a score to a specific student, I may want to send an email based on that. Also inside there, if it's email is scheduled, right? Scheduled email, what is that? That's just basically if we take this schedule and we click email, we would like to have an email template based on this. So when I click this button, an email gets created. I want to have a specific template that goes over that. Notice we hard-coded it before, but what I would like to do is create some kind of a template that we can use and customize this. So that can be really, really helpful. Okay, so those are all of the triggers that we have there inside that. So all the different triggers we have. So basically we have here 6 different triggers plus one template. Schedule email is not based on a specific trigger. It's just whenever we click the button, we want this certain email to do that. So that's what we're going to go into. So let's take a look at now. I haven't written any macros for this yet, so we're going to do all of that together. So when we have all these triggers, if I've got a trigger based on class created, well, that trigger, there's different elements in. For example, here in classes, if I have the class, and what do I want to send? Well, maybe I want to send the class name, or maybe I want to send the term, or maybe I want to send an email, the from date and to date, or the year level, right? So when a class is created, I want to send some information. Maybe I want to let the teacher know that we've created a class, and I want to let the teacher know the subject and the from, to dates, and things like that. However, when I create a brand new student, I may want to send the student an email, or maybe I want to send the principal an email, or one of the admins an email based on the student information. So in this case, there will be a student name, a student email, and a birth date, and all the student information, right? And if a teacher is created, again, likewise, we want to send different information. So the idea is that we want to send different information. Now, what we don't want to do is I don't want to create 7 different macros, and I want to keep a single macro that combines it, and I want to have those dynamics. So how do we do that? In other words, how do we create a single macro using a single email and have that content dynamic? Well, we can do it with a table, with basically a table. All we need to do is determine the trigger and then have specific variables based on that. And then what I want to do is I want to have values based on that. So how do we do that? Well, let me show you how we do that. And I'm going to scroll over here and we can see this specific kind of like table here, and this is going to help us tremendously. All we need to do is follow this. So here in this column, we have some information for class created. We have student created. So these are all of our triggers that we just went over. Now, if I am creating a class and I know the class ID and I know the row that that class is on, let's take a look inside the classes database just so we can familiarize yourself with the information on the classes. So here's the classes database, right? So if I know the class ID and I know the class row, then I can extract any information from that, right? As long as I know the information. Knowing the class ID and then know the row on that, then I can extract anything from I want from the database. So back into the notifications here, if I know the class ID and I know the database, or I would not calling this the row because it's really item 1, right? Item 1 is on row 4. Of course, class ID 2 is on item 2. And the reason this is like item 2, what do I mean by item 2? Well, I don't necessarily want the row in this case. I really want the item number. So again, this is item number 1. This is item number 2, item number 3. Okay. Sometimes we want the row, and that would be 4 or 5. But the item, if we're going to index, for example, if I'm indexing class names and I want to know the first item in that, it's going to be this. So we want the item number, in this case, not necessarily the row. So the idea is once I put in a class ID, if it's deleted, everything's going to be blank. But if I use formulas properly, once I put in a class ID, I can then extract all the values from that. Here's the variables, right? So if I know the variables, if I know all of the variables and I know the values, then all our macro needs to do is determine what is the column, find out where class is created, what is the column there, then run through these variables, run through from 8 to 17. If those variables are found anywhere in the message or anywhere in the subject, take whatever those variables when they're found, like this example teacher, and then replace them with the actual value. So here when we scroll over, let's just say in our sample teacher created, once teacher is found, or whatever that is, let's say I think under class created here, once the teacher is found, we can then replace it with John found. So all we need to do again is run a macro. That macro is going to loop from 8 to 17. We're going to look anywhere in the subject or anywhere in the message. If the teacher is found here, then replace it with the name of that, okay, with the actual name. Again, if the subject is found, then replace it here. So that's all I need to do. And then if I make dynamic columns based on this, well, I'll show you that. Dynamic columns mean class created would be this column. What column is that? We know the class created is going to be on column 15. We know the student created is going to be on column 17. So if I find this, if I locate this trigger, then I know what column it's located on. If I know what column is, I made it simple so that every single trigger has 10 variables just to make it easy, right? Then all I did was just take that and use a formula. That's why I created this before, because it's a lot of formulas. It'll take me way too long. You don't want to see me go through that. Plus, these are the type of formulas we've been over so many times. There's nothing really special about these formulas. I'll go over a few of them. They're different, but basically we're just using index and match. And then in this case, I'm basing index, like for example, the class name, basing it on P6. This is the row number. Now the row number, of course, is based on, we're indexing class name. Class name starts on row 4. So the first item in row 4 is going to be this. So that's how we found a P6. So all I need to do again is just take that, the class teacher, class email, and the class email I'm going to be basing it on the teacher full name if it's found. Let's go ahead and add some teacher emails in there so we can get that. I've got some here. I want to make sure that all the teachers at least have emails. Okay, there we go. So now we've got that, and back into the notification. So it's going to show that email based on that. So if we change it, teacher, it's going to show that. So I want to put that class ID or the student ID or the teacher ID or the transaction or whatever ID. So if I've updated a class, I want that ID to go here. If I've updated the student, I want that ID to go here, and so on and so forth per trigger. When I do that, all of the values are going to list. Again, all I need to do is loop through the variables. If the variables are found, I replace it with the value. So that's what we're going to do in the email. But before we do that, we got to get this functioning. So basically what I want to do, just like with the other records, I want to be able to save, update, delete, and of course cancel new email notifications. And I want those to appear in the database. Now I've got some data that I've just put in here to help us get started, but I do need to write the macros, and I want to do that with you. But before we do, let's just go over some of the formulas and specifications we have on this specific notification screen. First, I want a Boolean true or false, whether we're going to be displaying the emails. Now this particular option here, we have this checkbox that's going to display. So if we're going to display those emails, we're not going to send them directly. This is going to be true. If we want them sent, without displaying, then we're going to unselect this. Okay, that's going to be global for every email. Also, I want the selected email ID, just like we have individual. Each email we create is going to get a unique and new ID number. We're going to put that ID right here. I also need to know the database row that we're going to be setting. That's going to be here. Our email database is located right here. I want to know what row. Our first one's going to be row 4. So of course we're going to add 3 just like we do. We've got a named range called email ID. That's a dynamic email. I've just created that just as we do all the others. I want the selected row. When I select a specific row, I want conditional formatting to react, and I've got that here. So when I select a specific email, I want that email notification detail to load here. Notice this is not the original data, right? I've just got a selected number of data. I've also got a really cool combined text. Notice we have send 1 minute after teacher created, right? But what we're doing is we're going to combine all that into one single sentence. So we're going to call it send on. Obviously, my original data is broken up into multiple parts, but we can use the advanced filter inside the database, right? We can use a formula that's going to combine all of that, going to combine all of these fields. Send 1 minute after, right? After, and then our trigger, after our trigger. So I'm going to combine all of that to provide a nice little sentence summary to see how often or the frequency that we're going to be sending it, or actually when we're going to be sending that email. So send 1 minute after the student is created. So that's a great way to do that. So we're going to show you how we do that. And then I'm going to bring that inside here. As long as we have our original data, which we're going to put here, our ID, I'm going to put that right here. Our ID is going to then, once we select it, we're going to be able to load that individual email. So we need to know I want to know what selected row. So that's what our B5 is going to hold, our selected row. I want to know the next email ID. That's simply a max formula plus 1, just like we do. I want to know if that email is enabled or disabled, right? That's going to be saved in the database. If it's disabled, that email is not going to be sent. We can create emails and then we can turn them off or turn them on simply by using this enabled or disabled. That is going to be here on B7. Also, what I want to know is I want to know the trigger column, right? If I'm selecting a specific trigger, I want to know the trigger column. That's good. How do we know that it's column 15 or 17? Here's a list of triggers. We've got a named range called email triggers. It is this same named range we're going to use inside the data validation here. Data validation email triggers. So it is exactly those same exact names that we have here. So if I take here and I create a range here all the way from 04 all the way, not including all the way through, let's say AB, or even the last one Z. If I create a range and I want to look for that trigger in that range, I just create a match here. So if I'm going to do a match based on H4, whatever's in H4, the trigger, 04 all the way through AB4. So what I'm going to do is create a match, and I'm going to add 14. I'm adding 14 because I want the column number, right? If the first one is found, it's going to be 15, right? 1. So how do I get, if I find the first one class created, all I need to do is add 14, and that's going to extract that column. It is that column that I want. Very important, because I need to know what variables to load. Should I load these variables? Should I load these or these? If I know the column that it's found on, whether it's 15, 17, or 19, then I know what to load inside VBA. It makes it a lot easier. So as long as we have a number there, then yeah, of course, if it's empty and there's no number there, we can't load in those variables. That is how inside our macro, we can then load these variables, dynamic variables based on whatever trigger has been selected. Okay, relatively simple. We've got a list of triggers. Then what I want to know is I want to know the email database row. This is going to come in a little bit later on for sending the emails. When we send it, I want to know the email trigger. So basically, whatever email we're sending, we're going to put that trigger right here. Then what I want to do is I want to know what column it is. Again, same formula basically, but just different. This is when we're actually sending emails. All this is going to be used when we're sending, and I'll explain that in a little bit more detail later. But basically, we're going to do the same thing. I'm going to look at this trigger. We're going to place, the VBA will place this trigger here based on whether we're creating a new student, based on whether we've created a new class or teacher, or whatever the trigger is. Place that trigger. It's going to determine the column based on this trigger, that same match formula. And also what I want to know is the database row. That's the database row here. Is it 5 or is it 4? We only have 2. So I want to know the database row because it's important, because I need to extract the attachment, the subject, the message, the send type, and I need to get all that information. So that row, when I send that email, I need to know that. I also need to know the ID number. Now, this could be the student ID. This could be the class ID. This could be the transaction ID. That's why IDs are so critical, because they're unique for every single type of record. So we're going to call this the send record ID. And I'll explain this a little bit further. But basically, if we send an employee, if we create a new employee, we want to send if we create a new student and we want to send an email based on that new student, I need to know the ID of that student, because if I have that ID, I can then extract all the student information on that. And I also want to know the next log ID. That email logs can keep track of all the emails that are sent, right? So we've got a unique log ID. So the next one is going to be 10. It's just a max formula. That's all we do, is just to keep track of that. That's all we need for the emails. And so plus the macro, we're going to go over that. Okay, so we've got an understanding of what we'll be going over some of this again as we go through the macros, but I want to write those macros and get that up to date so that we can start saving and updating and creating new email notifications. Keep in mind that I've also created a brand new named range called email data. All right, let me go ahead and create that now. What I want is a named range on that email data. So I'm going to hold down my control. These are the things that I want to create. I want to do the control. I want to hold this down for all of the options here, holding the control down. So everything that I want cleared out, I'm going to hold the control. Then what I'm going to do is, I thought I had created it, but it's not yet, which is fine. Email data. So we're going to create something called email data. And now when I look it up, we're going to have to update it for the name range. So now it exists here, email data, but I need to update it. Notice it doesn't encompass the merge cell. So we need to update that named range. So inside the name manager, going into email data here, the one we just created, and I'll bring this down a little bit. And what I want to do is I just want to update that accordingly, so we can actually keep it long and then we'll keep it short so that we can see everything. So there we go. So now what I want to do is the first one, we see that we have F6 should be F6 all the way through G6. That's going to be for our email to. We don't need 2 in there. Okay, so F6, so let's take a look at that right on here, and it's going to be through G6. So I'm going to add the colon and then G6, and then I'm going to use F4. Okay, so that's going to cover that, but we see we need attachments. Attachments is going to carry all the way to H6, and that's going to start at F7 here on the attachments, F7. That's going to carry all the way over to H7, so we need to make the adjustment here, colon H7 and then F4. Okay, so that covers that. Next up, we also have the subject, and that's going to be F8 all the way over to I8. So we're going to go down here, F8, put down the colon, and then I8, and then F4. Okay, next up, what do we have? We have the message, and that's going to carry all the way from F9 all the way through I13, F9 through I13. So we're just going to scroll over here, and then put that colon in here, and then I13. Okay, then we're going to do F4. Tab out, and then we're going to tab back in, take a look and make sure that it encompasses all the data we want. That looks correct. Clicking the check mark, clicking close. Okay, so now again, when we put in email data, we want to make sure that, again, it handles all the data. There we go. That's what we want. All right, because it is that we're going to use to clear out the code. Okay, I'm going to save the work that we've done. And now what we're going to do is we're going to go into the developers and start getting some of these macros written. The first thing we want to do is to be able to save, new, and update. And we want to update this email database here. Okay, so into the developers and the Visual Basic we go. And I've created just some. We have email send macros and we have email macros right here. So we're going to write those email macros inside here. Now there's a few things. The only difference is when we want to save it, we also want to make sure anytime we save it, save a new one or update it, or anytime we create a new one, we want to make sure we update this list, this email notifications list. Okay, so we need to write that macro too. So let's put some variables in here so we can write those macros, and then we can get started on that. All right, so again, we're going to dimension the email row. We need that as long. And also we need the email column. We're going to use data validation as we do. Excuse me, we're going to use data mapping as we always do. So we're going to do that as long. And also we're going to need to use the last row as long. And of course the last results row. Since we're running an advanced filter, we're going to need the last results row as long. Okay, so let's write down which macros we want and then we'll fill it in. So first one is going to be sub, email, save, and update. The same macro that we're going to use for both saving and update. It's not sub, okay. Then we're going to write, we also want to write email load. So we wanted to load that. So sub, email, in this case, load. What else do we want? Well, of course, we need to add new, and we also need to cancel new. So we can write that in sub, email, in this case, add new. cancel new also. Okay, so we'll write that down. Sub email and then cancel new. Also going to be deleting, so let's just copy that. I need to be able to delete that, so we're going to just put delete. And then also I want to refresh the list. As we talked about, we need to be able to refresh the list, so let's write that in now. This one's going to be called refresh list. Refresh list. So I want to read, that's the one that's going to refresh the list below the form. And then lastly, we want to have a new one called browse to add. Remember, we're adding attachments, so I want to be able to add attachments. So browse to add. Okay, I like that there. That's going to be good. So because we need to browse and get that attachment in there. That's it for the macros. Now the browse to add, that's very, very similar to something we've done before. When we did actually exams, we had to browse. Remember, we did exams, we had to browse to for an exam and add that exam here. So why don't we take that macro and just copy it and then make some updates. It's going to be a lot easier. And that's, of course, in our exam macros here, exam macros. And let's take a look at that. Let's scroll down. I think it's at the bottom here, and we'll find that. And that's the one we want. So let's go ahead and copy everything here. And then I'm going to paste that inside our new email macros, and then I'm just going to paste it in. Then what I'm going to do is I don't want the word exam, I want the word email. So all I need to do is use find and replace within the selected text. So I'm going to select all the text. I'm going to do Control F. I'm going to look for the word exam, and then I'm going to replace it with the word email. And then that's only for the selected text. Make sure it's only for selected text. And what we'll do is we'll replace all. Okay, 13 replacements. Okay, now we can start to work with it. Okay, email path, new path, that's going to be fine. Application, email file dialog, that's fine. Admin folder check, we want to run that. That's good. App folder, that looks good. Emails, right? Now that's not our sheet name, right? Our sheet name is called, in this case, called notifications, right? So let's double check the notifications here. It's called notifications. So we need to update that. So call this notifications. And then email file application, this is fine. This is fine. Select, we don't need this text. Well, let's update that. Select an email attachment. Okay. All right, now that we have that, everything's fine here. The application, in this case, I want to make a directory called emails. Let's call this email attachments. Email underscore attachments. Okay, that's going to be a brand new folder called, so all of our email attachments are going to be stored in there, and that's only if it doesn't exist. So we want to make sure to check for that. So we're going to copy this, and then we're going to paste that right in here. So that's going to create a new one. Email attachment is going to go right in here. Our new path, going to copy the email path, new path, that's perfect. So all of those email attachments are going to be stored in a single folder called email attachments. We're going to create that folder if it doesn't exist by using it here. We're going to copy that from its original location into the new path. Then once we email it, we know exactly where to find that attachment because it's going to be in here. So we're going to copy that. All right, now instead of F9, where do we want to place that? I want to place that directly inside here, and that's going to be right here located in F7. So we need to update that. We want it located in F7 is going to be placed. All right, let's just test that out and let's assign the macro so we can not to worry about that. I'm going to copy this macro. I'm going to take this button here, and then I'm going to right click it, and then I'm going to assign the macro, and I'm going to paste that in there. Paste that macro and click OK. Now what we're going to do is browse for that. It's going to go folder dialog here, and then we could just browse to that and click OK. All right, and then we get bugged. Let's check the make directory app. We don't have this. We want to make sure that the application here is attachments. We want to make sure we can actually make a directory. It's already this. We need to copy this. I meant to do this only if it doesn't exist. I meant to copy this here. Oh, we're checking for attachments. If this doesn't exist, then we want to make the directory. So let's double check that now. Run it again. Put in the copy. Okay, so that looks good. Now we've got that specific file located right here in the attachments. Everything looks good with that. Saving our work. And now what we're going to do is let's fill out the rest of those macros. It's going to be relatively easy. In fact, what we can do is we can probably use the same macros that we did on transactions, and we can just update that. So why don't we do that? Because it's very, very similar. Then we can make those updates accordingly. So something like transactions, I think transaction was similar. So then we'll just rewrite it again. I think it's going to be a lot quicker. So all we need to do is go into the transaction macros here. And then I'm going to, again, copy this and paste this here. We'll do all the way from save. We don't have sort names. We don't have to worry about that. Transaction add new, load, cancel new, delete. That looks good. Okay, so I'm going to copy those. And what we're going to do is we're going to go into the email macros here. And then just not the refresh list because we're going to need to write that independently. And then, so I'll just paste this in here. Okay, now what we're going to do with transaction, instead of transaction, we don't want the word transaction, we want email. So I'm going to use, again, Control F, finding that anywhere. First of all, let's just take the transactions, the sheet name transactions. Anywhere the sheet name is transactions, I'm going to replace that with notifications because I want to make sure that we've, that long one, notifications. Okay, and then the selected text, only we're going to replace all, 6 replacements. Now what we can do is the shorter name, always the long one first, transaction, replace that in this case, or with, actually let's go with transaction database, right? Anywhere the transaction database, I'm going to replace that with email database, and then replace all of the selected text. Okay, 11 there. Now what we can do, again, instead of the word transaction, and then in this case, we're going to replace it with email. And then replace all in the selected text again. Okay, and 49 replacements. Okay, very good. Now we can take a look. Okay, so now we're ready to go, much easier. So we've got some required, when we save and update, we've got some required fields, just as we did with transactions. So in those required fields, I'm going to keep them simple at both the email name and the trigger name. Those are going to be required. So F4 and H4 are required. So let's do that. F4, H4, those are going to be 2 required. So if either one of those are blank, then we need to let the user know. So then we're going to cut it off here. Then we can just simply write some text to let the user know. In this case, or then, we don't need that extra or there. In this case, please make sure to include, in this case, we're going to call this email name and email trigger. And we'll say these are required fields. Okay, good. Easy enough. Okay, now again, we need to determine if it's a new email or not. So that's going to be our email database row here. If our email ID is blank, this B4 is blank. So anywhere we have B5, we're going to change it to B4. Previously, it was B5. So again, inside this, on this side of this module, anywhere B5 is shown, I'm going to change it to B4. So let's put quotations just to be sure, to make sure we've got the full. And then in this case, current module, we replace that with B4. B4. So that way, anywhere it shows up, it's going to automatically replace all. Okay, that's 6 replacements. Okay, so if B4 is empty, then it's a new email. We're going to make sure that email row is going to be the email database. That's a correct sheet 8, the first available row. I like that. Okay, then what we're going to do is we're going to take the next email ID. Where's our next email ID? Is located directly here inside B6. So that's good. B6 is going to take on our next. So I like that. That's already here. Now our email ID, what is this email ID? Now I want to take our email ID, the one that just got created, and I want to put it directly inside B3. So B3 is going to take on that. So let's make sure that B3 gets updated here. B3 is going to take on that next email ID. If it's existing, our email row is going to be B4. All right, that looks good. Now we need to determine the columns. Now I've already mapped this out to make things easier because we've done this already so many times. So we're going all the way to column, in this case, let's see, okay, we got to update, we got 2 macros, all the way to 13. Okay, so let's go there, and we know that we're going to run the loop all the way to 13, and we'll take care of that duplicate macro name. Okay, email, save and update. Let's just take a look, save, load, refresh list. Okay, so we're going to go to column 13 this time. Again, email database, we've got everything mapped out just as we've done many, many times before, so we don't need to focus on that. The next email column, shapes, existing email group, and then I'm going to make sure that those shapes are named just like we've done here. Again, let's take a look at our shapes here, inside our shapes here. New email group, that looks good. And we have existing email group, that looks good. So that's the way we want it, perfect. All right, so we're gonna show those and hide those. That's easy, we've done that. And then of course, I don't wanna resort the email names. We're gonna use something else. I'm going to use this macro right here, this one, refresh list, this email. I want this to run as soon as we save a new one. So that's the one I want. I also want to run, let's just put this here. I'm going to put, instead of resort, I'm going to put refresh. And then it's going to be email, refresh emails. Okay, so email refresh list. Then what, we don't need this email sort names. That's not going to be anything new. We don't need to resort, but we do need to refresh. Okay, so email add new. Email data, remember we created that named range just recently. So we want to clear the contents of that. Email, everything looks good on email add new. We'll assign those macro. Email load, this will be a little bit different. With notifications, what I want to do is when I select a specific email, I want that information to show up here. Now, we're going to be putting here inside, once we run the macro, we're going to be putting these specific exam save update. All right, I just got a duplicate module here, so I'm going to remove that module, something that, all right, so we don't need that because we're getting exam. We just have a single macro. That looks good. Okay, so back inside the email macros, basically what I want to do is I want to make sure that we are adding new ones and loading them. So when I run this load, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this. Here we go. I'm going to take an ID. This is going to be our email ID. It's going to be brought over from our database. Don't need this. It's going to be brought over, our email ID. I'm going to bring that over. I'm going to run an advanced filter. I'm going to take that email ID and all this information. I'm going to bring it over inside our notifications. I'm going to place that email ID here. When I select on something, I want this email ID to transfer over to here, email ID. What that's going to do, as soon as I put it there, it's going to generate a row. Once I have that row, I'm going to need to know all the fields to load. So I want to make sure that one, we have the email ID on the specific email we select on load. And I also want to make sure that B4 is not empty. So the first thing I do when I select something, I'm going to take, assuming that it's not blank here in K, I'm going to take whatever's there, I'm going to place it directly inside B3. Okay, so I want to make sure that B4 is not empty to do that. If it is, we have a problem. So if B4 equals empty, then please select on a correct, let's fix that, email from the list below, email from the table below. Okay, so I like that. And then email row is going to be B4. That's get 1 to 10. We don't want that. In fact, we're going to change that to 13, right? Because there's 13 columns in our table. Going to load that, and this one we don't need. Keep this as 1. Also, this, you see this 6 and 8. You know what that was from? That's something that I missed last time. I just want to bring your attention that in the transactions, I just wanted to show you that because that was kind of important. Okay, and then I'm going to go back here in the transactions. If you remember correctly, we are saving in the transactions database here. I'm saving the student ID and I'm saving the teacher ID. Both of these things are generated from formulas, right? Here inside the transactions here, student ID, and we have the teacher ID. But what I don't want to do is when I load in this transaction, sorry, I went back, but I forgot to add this to you last time. When I go back inside, I don't want these updated. In other words, what I don't want to do is I don't want to take this information, and I don't want to load it back into here. I don't want to bring it back inside here. So the best thing to do is to make sure that when we load them back in, we're excluding those 2 columns. So if you take a look at this, okay, so this is column 6, right? And this is column 8. So if we have 6 and 8, so what I don't want to do is when the column is 6 and when the column is, I don't want to bring this information, I don't want to bring it back inside our transactions here. So I just excluded those from the macros. So if we go back into the macros here, email teaches transaction here, I want to make sure that on the load we're doing that. So that's exactly what I did here under load here. If transaction is not 6 and transaction column is not 8, then load it in. Okay, so we're just excluding these 2 columns. So I just wanted to bring that to your attention. Okay, so back inside the email macros here's where we are, we're load email database, and we're just basically going to load the data directly from the email database here. We've been over the data mapping before a few times, bringing that into their respective fields here, whether it's F4, B7, or H4, just bringing all that data inside. That's all we're doing. So again, in this case, I'm selecting it. I'm taking the ID here. I'm not loading it in from here. I'm loading it from the original database. So because that's where we have our data mapping. All I'm doing is using this to basically extract whatever email ID. Once it's in here, we generate a row. The row is generated. We can then pull the data from the row in B4. So that's how we do. That's all we need for load, and then we're updating this. For cancel new, in this case, what I want to do is I want to make sure that we actually have a value. In this case, where's our located? I want to make sure that there's a value. Let's say E17. If it's E17 is not empty, that means there are previous email notifications that have been saved. All I want to do is select on E17 if it's not empty. So let's make the adjustment there accordingly, because all we're doing is selecting. If, in this case, right, well, let's change this to notifications. E17, that's our data sheet here. E17 is the cell we want to focus on. If that is not empty, then all we want to do is select on that. So all I'm going to do is going to copy that here and then make the selection. Then, again, we can get rid of all this, paste this in here, dot select all I want to do is select on it, because when I select on that, as soon as I select on that, it's going to run a macro, and that macro is going to load whatever's here. It's going to load all those fields if we're canceling new. All right, so that's it. And deleting, are you sure you want to delete this? And let's this email. Okay, we can just leave that. Yes, no, delete, and again, update that title there, then exit the sub. If notifications B4 is empty, right? Again, that is correct. That is our email database row. Then please make sure you select an email to delete. Let's just change that, clear that text, email to delete. Okay, perfect. Email row is going to be notifications B4, that's E4. Email database, again, 3, let's go all the way to 13 in this case, keeping the first column. Email row, email column, clear contents. Email sort names, that's what we don't want to do. We're going to run this one right here. Refresh list. Once it's deleted, I want to refresh the list. That's the one we're going to email add new. Perfect. Okay, so we're refreshing the list, then we're going to run the macro to add new. So all we need to do is now write this macro that's going to allow us to refresh the list. So what are we trying to achieve here? So basically inside the email database, what I want to do is I want to take all this data, I want to run it through an advanced filter. I want to make sure that the email name is not blank. We do that here. I want to make sure that it has a value, right? So not blank. And then what I want to do, if it's not blank, I want to get those results and I want to bring them all here. And I want to do that, but this one I'm going to leave blank. So why? Because this one doesn't exist. This field doesn't exist. This is simply a combination of multiple fields. Send 1 minute after trigger. Okay, it's based on this formula, right? So all I'm gonna do is bring these results in here. This will be blank initially because there's no header there. Now when we run an advanced filter with a blank header, we need to make sure that those original data also includes a blank header. So I'm gonna run that original data starting from row 3, right, all the way to column N, making sure that includes this blank, and that way our results can have a blank. Once our results have the blank, what I'm going to do is I'm going to populate the data based on a formula. So I can clear all this out. Then I can take this formula here, which is the combination of all the results here. If we look at that, we see it's based on all the results here. That's going to give us that send 1 minute after student created just by combining them. And once they're combined, I can then take that formula and bring that formula down here to create that. Then all I need to do is bring all of this information in up until here, up until the email ID. I don't need to bring this information in. Taking all this information here up into the last row, bringing it inside here and just placing it directly here, all in these columns here. Email ID, this could be hidden eventually here. Okay, so that's all we're going to do is just bring in that data there and bring it in. So first thing we want to do is make sure we clear out any fields here all the way from E17 all the way through K. And I also want to clear out any results that might be there all the way inside from R all the way through AB. I want to clear all that out just so we can get it ready for the first. So that's what we're going to do first. So inside the notifications, should use the shorter sheet name, range, okay, so E17, I want to clear that out all the way through K and then a large number. That we're going to clear the contents out, okay, not comments, contents. So clearing that out, any clear existing emails. So clear existing emails. I want to do the same thing, but inside the email database. So with email database, and then I also want to clear out the results. I want to clear out any of the results that might be there as we did. So our results, where are they going to start in? They're going to start in column R and go all the way to AB. So R3 all the way through A, B, and then a large row. And not valley, but clear the content. Okay, so we're clearing the contents out. So now what I want to do is determine the last row. We do already have the last row and we have last results row as items here, last row and last result row. So we've got those variables defined. We can now run them. So the last row is going to be equal to the last available row inside the database. That's going to be the last row. And now if the last row is less than 3, then we can exit out of the sub. So we just want to make sure last row, then exit the sub. That's auto hotkey that helps me because I use that all the time. Okay, so, but it's not 3. In this case, it's 4. So we need to update that in this case. All right, so now we're ready to run our advanced filter. So we're going to run that advanced filter and then we're going to automate that. Again, auto hotkey to help me. So this time it's going to be column 3, excuse me, row 3 here, starting at A. And where does our data? A3 all the way again. I remember I got to go to N because I have to include a blank. So it's going to go all the way to N. So here, let's make that up to change that to N. And then what about our criteria? Our criteria is located here in column P, P2 through P3. So let's update the code to include that. P2 through P3. And then our results are going to go all the way inside from R all the way to AB. Let's go R here and then all the way to AB2. That's where our results are going to go. Let's bring this, we create some more space for us. There we go. Okay, so that's good. Let's take a look at that, making sure that we have the right ones all the way to AB. So that's going to get us those results. Now what we need to do is once we run that advanced filter, we need to determine that there's the last results row. So the last result row is going to be equal to, in this case, it's not going to be column A. I'm going to use column R on that because that's a required field, which is our email name, which is required. So it's going to get us our last row. Now, if the last row is less than 3 in this case, exit the sub, but not last row, it's last result row. If our last result row is less than 3, then exit the sub. Nothing we can do. Okay, but assuming that we do have data, what I want to do is then I want to bring down that formula. So we've got, remember, this is blank. So I want to take whatever's in T1, the formula, and bring it all the way down to last row. So we can do that in a single line of code. So it's going to be something like this. Dot range T3 through T in the last results row. Dot, not formula, not value, but formula. Formula is equal to dot range T1, whatever's in T1, the formula there. That's what we're going to just bring that formula down. That'll automatically bring it down to and calculate it. All right, we can calculate it, but we're not going to turn off calculations in this case. Okay, so that's going to bring down the formula. Now what we're doing is we're ready to simply bring it over all into our notifications. So again, notifications, we've already cleared it out. Dot range, in this case, it's going to be E17 through K, and we're starting out in 17, but in the results we're starting out in 3, so we need to add 14. And the result, I guess, the last result row plus 14, right? Dot value is going to equal basically our results. So it's going to go all the way from R3 dot range R3 through, I only want to bring it over to the email ID, which is located in X. X and the last result row, Okay, so that's going to bring over emails from the database, bring over emails. All right, if we delete one, they're not going to have a name, so we wouldn't include that, emails. All right, so that's good. That's just the way I want it. So now that we've brought them over, we're good to go. We don't need anything else. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to save that, and I'm going to run this here and see if there's any issues. Now we're going to take a look inside the notifications, and perfect, it's here. We've got our email IDs, we've got our student. We still have to create the macro to load, to select on it and load that, but we're good to go on that. So I like that. That's going to refresh the list. Everything looks good there. All right, so now what do we do is when I want to run the macro to load, when I make a selection, when I select on that, I want to run that macro. Well, that's, of course, in selection change. It's going to be a selection change event. Another thing I want to do on the worksheet while we're at it is I want to create a macro that as soon as we make a change, even on load, that those variables are going to load. So let's write that up right now. All right, inside the developers, and then what we're going to do is we're going to go inside. I'm going to focus on this sheet, this notifications sheet. And let's open that up so you can see which sheet we're on here. Notifications, right? So the first thing what I want to do, well, we got 2 macros to write. So worksheet, and we'll focus on the selection change. If a user makes a selection change based on inside that table. So if not, selection change. In this case, the range is going to be E17 all the way through, let's just say J and then a large number. They make a selection, and I want to make sure that J contains a value. So and range, sorry, K is where our numbers, K is where our ID is located, and the target dot row dot value does not equal empty, then what we want to do is run to. So we need to make sure that there's a value here. If they make a selection on that, then what do we want to do? I want to take whatever's value here and I want to place it directly inside B3. And I also want to set the row that we selected located in B5. So those are the 2 things that we're going to do. Then we're going to run the macro to load it in. So the first thing we want to do is range, and let's say B5 dot value equals the target row. That's going to set the row for the conditional formatting. Next up in B3, range B3, I want to put that email ID dot value equals the email ID. Where is it located? It's located in range, it's K and the target row. That is where that ID is located. Email ID and then selected row. So the only other thing that we need to do now is just simply run the macro. So that macro is simply called email load. All right, good. So that's all we have to do. I'm going to save that. And now what I want to do is I want to write a macro for change on the worksheet change event. When a user makes a change to H4, what do I want to do? I want to load in the associated variables based on what? Based on this column right here, this trigger column. And when I change this to student created, this is going to go to 17. 17 is the column in which I need to load in these variables all the way from row 8 through 17 in column 17. That's when I will load in these variables, or I want to load in these variables or these. So that's what we have to do. So let's write that up right now inside there. So it's based on a change event, of course. If not, we're going to be making change based on H4 is nothing. And I also want to make sure that B8 contains a value, right? If they make the change and there's nothing here, there's no number here in B8, then it's going to be a problem. So I want to make sure that B8 contains a value, and range B8 dot value is not empty. We need that column. Okay, so then the first thing I want to do is mention the variable column, stuttering column as long. And then now we're going to set that variable column. Variable column is going to be equal to whatever's in B8. So range B8 dot value. Now we can bring it over. So now range J4 through J13 dot value is going to be equal to what? Let's take a look at that. So we're going to bring in from J4 all the way to J13. We're going to bring it in whatever's in. We're going to use dynamic, the column in the row. So we need a range on that. And then we're going to bring in it. So let me show you how we'll do that. So it's going to be equal to range. What's the first in the range? It's going to be cells. We're going to use cells because we have a dynamic column. So cells, the row is 8. Remember, we're starting at 8. And I'm going all the way to 17. So the first part is 8. What is that column? Variable column. That's the first part. What's the second? It's going to be all the way to 17. Cells, the row is going to go all the way to 17. Again, the variable column here. There we go, dot value. So all we need to do is bring in that. So now as soon as we change it, it's going to automatically load. Now it can be for whether we're loading it or whether we're selecting it, or anyway. So I'm going to save the work, and let's take a quick look at that and see how that's going to work for us. Okay, so student created, double click that, and then let's click here. Make that change to H4. And we need to update that. Let's just say H4, not 12. Okay, now it's going to work. 4. Okay, so now let's take a look. Double click here, inside here. Perfect. Okay, I'm going to move this over a little bit. It's a little bit too close to that drop down unless it gets confusing. Okay, so student created, teacher created. Now it's going to load based on the information. Perfect. That's the way I like it. Okay, what about the selection change event? Now we're loading them in. That looks good. Now we're actually loading that in. Okay, let's assign the macros that we've already created to this button setup here. So I'm going to do that, holding down the control to new email. This is going to be what's called the new email. I'm going to right click, assign that macro. It's going to be based on the email, add new. Click OK. Same thing. We have update here. Update is going to be for save update, email update. So right click, in this case, email, save update. That's the one we're looking for. Down here, email, save, update. Now delete the email, we've already written that. I'm going to right click that. Here again, sign the macro, this case email, and now we're looking for email delete, which is right here. Okay, so we're going to click new email and then click new email. That looks good, it's working good. Again, I want to assign the macro, the save update, to this email here. I know we're moving quick, but hey, you know what? We've got a lot to cover still. I just want to rate this. So save email, email, save update, same macro here, same macro, all the way here. Okay, and the last one is cancel new. Holding down the control, right click, cancel new email, cancel new. Okay, so now we've got all the macros written. Let's click that in, making sure that that's working here. Let's unclick one of the shapes here. Cancel new, that works good. Click update, that looks good. And let's change this to 2 minutes. And then click update. Okay, so now you see the summary is 2 minutes. Perfect. So that's working really good. I like that. Everything's good. Okay, let's write the macros that are going to actually create these emails. And that's going to be really fascinating because what we want to do is we want to make sure that any type of a trigger that we create is going to use the same macro. Now, anytime we also want to create emails based on some kind of a schedule, we really need 3 different macros. You want to remember, anytime you create an email based on some type of a schedule, you want to create 3 different emails, and I'll go over those in a minute. There's 3 different. The first email is simply going to add, and I need to update here in this one. So what are we missing when we see this? We need wrap text, right? I need a command line that's going to do just this, wrap text. So that's something we forgot to put in, no problem. So when I save or update, let me just do that right now because it's kind of annoying. Email macros here. When we save or update, let's go all the way up here, the first one, save or update. All I need to do right here is go into email database dot range, email row and colon, and email row dot wrap text equals false. It's going to run. Okay, so that covers that. I like that. Good. Run that. Okay, perfect. So that's the way I like it. We're just removing the wrap text. Okay, so let's getting back to this. So anytime we need 3 different emails, we need 3 different macros. The first macro here, this is our email log database. The first macro is simply going to add a specific transaction to this log database, right? We want to add in, I should say email. We want to add an email. I want to know a log. I want to know what trigger. I want to know the email database row. What is the row? Where is it located? Is it 4 or 5? I want to know the row so I know what to send out. I also want to know what the trigger column is. That's important. If we have the trigger, we know the trigger column. The record ID, what is the ID? Is it student ID? Is it teacher ID? Is it a class ID? When to send it. I need to know when to send it. When should we send that? And if it's been sent or not, it should be blank. If it's not been sent, it should be blank. Very, very important, because what I need to do is I need to differentiate those that have been sent already to those that have not. And then I want the row. Then what I want to do is then that's one macro. One macro sends it automatically this. Then another macro is going to basically run an advanced filter. It's going to determine all of the emails that have not been sent equal blank, where sent on equals blank. It's going to put those results right in here. It's going to put in. Then what we're going to do is we're going to sort all those based on the earliest time to the latest time. Earliest time to latest time. So it's going to create those results, put in here, sort them based on the send on, where the earliest and the latest. Then what it's going to do is going to take a look at this first one. This first one, is that date and time currently now or before? If it's already passed, we need to send that email now. If it's in the future, if this first one is in the future, schedule a macro to send that email on this date and time. Otherwise, schedule it, otherwise send it now. So schedule it in the future or send it now. So again, 3 macros. Let's go over those again. One, to add the data. Another one to run the advanced filter and schedule, and the other macro to simply send the email. So we're going to write those 3 macros right now. Okay, so inside the macro, I'm going to list out those 3 macros, and I've got a new module here that I'll use. I'm going to call it email send macros, and one's going to be called send to log. One's going to be called check and schedule, so it's going to check to see if, and one's going to actually be able to send it. So, and then what we're going to do is we're going to rerun this check and schedule after we've sent it. We're going to rerun this. So what we'll do is we're going to add those informations in, but how do we know we're going to add it? So the first thing what I want to do is go into something like students, and I want to go down here and I want to create some 2 fields basically. I want to know when we add a new student, I want to know, are we going to be sending an email for this or not? So we're going to create 2 fields that are going to help us determine just that. So what I'm going to do is just color those in green, give those some kind of border. And then I want to know if it's enabled. So what I want to do is I want to find something in this database. Let's look in this email database here. I want to look in this. Is student created? Does it exist in the database? Is it here? It means have we created an email for us to send that student? Is it here? And is it enabled? So if it's here and it's found on row 4, great. I know where it is, but is it enabled? So I want to create 2 fields that are going to give us that information. So we've already have a named range. Let's go into the formulas and name manager. Let's take a look at some emails. So we have email trigger, we have email information, email ID, email trigger here. So this is the one I want to know. I want to know email trigger here. So again, that's the email trigger. I want to know here, not the email name, but the email trigger. Email trigger is what we're looking for. Student created. So does the trigger exist? And if so, is it enabled, right? So how do we know that? Well, we can do just a few things. So let's take a look inside back in students. So I'm going to go for, it's called email trigger. And all we need to do is run a match. So equals if error, just going to end up being match. What am I running a match on? I'm looking up. What am I looking up? I'm looking up here, this one called student created. That's what I'm looking up. Where am I looking up? I'm looking up an email trigger. If it's found, I want to know the row it's been found on. I want an exact match, and I want to add +2. And then otherwise, if it's an error, empty. Okay. So there we go. So now email trigger is found on row 3. Let's take a look at that. I think it should be row 4. I need to add 3 onto that. 3. Okay, so now we got this. So the email trigger is found on row 4 of the email database, right? It's found on row 4, student created. If it's here, sorry, let's go with these triggers. It's found here. I should change this. This is just the email name, although it happens to be the same. I'm looking for this trigger, class created, student created. So if it's found on row 4. Now I need to know if that's enabled or not. So that's located in column C, right? All right, well, let's create a new named range that's going to let us know if it's enabled or not. I want a name range just for this column so it's easier to see inside. So again, we'll go into the formulas, name manager. We have one on email ID already. So I'm going to copy that. I'm going to do new. And this one's going to be called email _ enabled. Then I'm going to paste it in, except that column in this case is going to be column C. So I'm going to move over here. I'm going to change instead of A, column C. Okay, so now once we have that, tab out, tab in, that's going to be enabled. So what I want to do is I want to index that, and I want to determine is it enabled or not. So back into the students, we'll do something. So I want email. So I know that there's a trigger on for email enabled. So now what I want to do is I want to determine. So equals, if error, just in case. What I want to do is index here. What is it? Email enabled, the one we just created. And then I want the row number. Well, the row number is going to be this, in this case, -3, because I want to know the first one. Then the column is going to be 1. And then if there's an error, okay. So basically, I want to make sure that this is true, right? So when we add a new employee, I'm going to check for 2 things. 1, is this not blank? And 2, is this true? If both of those things, if this is not blank, that means there is an email trigger for that, and it is enabled, then we're going to run the macro to send it. So let's write that right now, just so we don't need to write that again, and then we can do that. So what we're going to do is we're going to copy this one, send and log, but I'm going to do that in new employees. So no employees, new students, keep saying employees. All right, so that's going to be inside our student macros right here, students miscellaneous. Add new, not add new, but save and update. So when we save and update a student, it's going to be only for new students. So we're going to go down here, and then all I'm going to do is I'm going to check on those 2 conditions. And we're going to do the same thing for all the triggers here. We may not do them all in this training, but it's very, very simple. So if, we want to make sure that we're on the right students. Of course, we're on the right students. If dot range b24 dot value equals, or does not equal empty, I should say, does not equal empty, and b25 equals true, then what we're going to do is run the macro. Then I want to do something. Then value, let's say, equals true. Then do something. Well, what do we want to do? Well, I want to send the log, but before I send the log, what I need to do is I need to send some information. I need to know what we're sending, right? I want to know what type of trigger we're sending, which is email created. And I also want to know what the the student ID located here in J of 7 or located also here. And so I want to know that. We have to add that student ID, because remember, this email log database, we need to know what the record ID, in this case, it's our student ID. I also need to fill out this table. So the log ID is automated. We know it's going to be student created. The email database row, we know it's going to be based on this trigger. In this case, student created is going to be 4. So we know that much. We know the trigger column because that's going to be automatically located. As soon as we add it, we'll be able to find that trigger column. But what we're going to do is we're going to add that information just temporarily here. This is where this area comes in. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to put that send record ID, I'm going to put that student ID located right here in B22. I also want to put what trigger, in this case student created, I want to put the trigger right here. Once I add that information here, just in this, then I know everything to send to the log. So the macro is going to take care of sending the log, but first thing I want to do is do 2 things. I want to send the trigger, what trigger, I want to put it directly here in notifications, B21. And I also want to take that student ID and I want to directly in B22, because another macro will take care of everything else. That way we can do a single macro regardless if it is a student, regardless if it is a class or teacher, or whatever the trigger is, that ID is going to be located here. The trigger is going to change. It is this trigger that's going to tell us the trigger column, right? So if I change this to student created, it is that trigger that's going to change to now the trigger column is 17. So we've got a trigger column. So all I need to do is add the right trigger, and then I know what column. So let's do that right now. Let's add it in B21 and B22 inside that new student macro. So those are the only things we need to do. So if those two things are true, notifications, let's put it in the sheet name because that's what we're going to be working with. Notifications dot range, in this case B22 dot value equals, what is it? Basically it's whatever's in J7, the student ID. So all I need to do is copy that here and then place it directly in here. That's where it's going to go. B22 is going to take on that record ID, we'll call it student ID or record ID. In this case, it's kind of a general term. And also, what else do I need? In B23, we need to place something. In B23, we're going to be replacing the trigger. That's going to be dynamic. 21 is going to take that trigger. It's going to be static. It's called student created. Make sure you get that spelling right, because otherwise, student created, that's the trigger. So that's all we need to do is just add in these two things, 21, 22, and then we can send it to the log, because it is this macro that's going to take care of everything else for us. Okay, glad we got that done. Let's go back into that now that we have. So is this kind of this trigger? All we need to do is add just these 4 or 5 lines of code, 5 lines of code to new classes, new students, new teachers, or whatever it is. Checking that, and then of course the two. We just need to add these two things on every single, whether it's teachers, classes, or schedules. I'll do a few later on. Okay, so let's take a look at that and we'll add that in. So now we can go back into the email macros or email send macros and start writing the send to log. Relatively easy. Let's do it. Okay, inside this, we're going to need some variables as always. So what are those variables? Well, the first is going to be the email database row as long. And I also want to know the trigger column as long, email log row as long, and also the send quantity as long. What is that send quantity? Well, inside our database here, email database, we need to know the send quantity here, 2 minutes, 1 minute, 2 hours. This is our send quantity. So we need to know that. That's going to be a long variable. All right. Along with that, I also need to know the send type. Dimension the send type as a string, and also the send frequency as a string. So once we've got that, I also want to know the send on date. Send on, that's going to have to be calculated as a date. So we're good to go. So now what I want to do, the first thing I want to do is when we send over that, when I bring over that information, remember I brought over the student created and I brought over the trigger column. The first thing I want to do is I want to make sure to run calculate. There's some formulas here. So the first thing on this sheet here, I want to make sure to calculate. So that's the first thing. Let's just write that up. So notifications.calculate. That's going to calculate any formulas that we have on there. And also what I want to make sure is we need to make sure that we have the database here in B19. And we also need to make sure in B20 we have a trigger column. If either one of those are blank, then we know there's a problem. So B19 and B20 cannot be blank. If either one of those are blank, then we can exit out of the sub because that's going to create a problem. So let's continue on. So if notifications.range B19.value equals empty, and then or what? Or B20. So if either one of those are empty, then we can do or B19 then, so B20, we need to have values in those, then exit the sub. Because I got to have values for those before I can move on, then exit sub. Okay, assuming that there's values there, then we can move on. So the email database row is going to be equal to whatever's in B19. I need to know that email database row so I can add some information. Equals B19. Okay, so what else do I need? I need to know the send frequency. The send frequency is going to be what? It's going to be equal to the email database dot range. Where's it located? I want to extract that send frequency so I can figure out what to send it on. It's going to be located right here. The send frequency is located in L. The send quantity is located in K. So I need that information. And I also need to know what we're going to be after. So Ken, I also want to know the send type after that as well. Okay, so let's put that in right now into some variables. So send frequency is going to be located in L and the email database row. That's going to be called dot value. It's going to be called the send frequency. Send frequency. Also, send quantity. Send quantity is going to be equal to the, again, nearly the same. We can just copy that and then change it's going to be K. So send quantity is located in K, And then we've got that. Okay, so we've got that there. Send quantity. Okay, now that we have that, I also want to know the send type. Well, is it send now or send immediately? Send type. And that's, of course, going to be located directly inside here, J. So we can copy that and then just place that in there. So this is going to be in J. That's our send type. Okay, so first thing I want to know, is it going to be send immediately? If we're sending immediately, it's much easier. We don't need to calculate the time the send on is going to be now. So what I'm trying to do is I want to calculate what time we're going to be sending that on, right? So how do we know when we're sending? So for example, if we're filling this information out, how do I know when to send it? If it's send immediately, then just make this the time now. If it's send after the current date, then we need to calculate the send on. So we need to determine that, and that's going to be based directly on this send type here, which comes directly from here. So is it send, in this case, 2 minutes after, or is it send immediately? So if it's send immediately, then all we need to do is just copy and paste that, the now, set it to now. All right, so let's write that up. Pretty simple. If send type equals send immediately, then do some things. What do we want to do? Well, the first thing what I want to do is I want to hit the send on equals now. Then I want to go to just skip everything else. Skip what we're about to do, which is going to be to calculate the send on based on the other scenarios. Okay, so else, I guess we can just use else, that's fine. Else, let's do select case, because those are different. Else, that means it's not send immediately. So now what we need to do is basically calculate the send on based on some of the parameters that we have. So what are those parameters? Well, it's going to be based, of course, on this send frequency. Send frequency, again, is going to be based on minutes, days, hours, not. So that's going to be located right here. Send here. This is going to be minutes, hours, days. So let's write up a select case. We've got a bunch of different options on that. So let's do this select case. And in this case, it's going to be based on the send frequency. So it's relatively easy. Case is equal to, in this case, minutes. We're going to be doing something. What do we want to do if it's minutes? In that case, I'm going to use, I want to, of course, set the send on is equal to date add. We're going to use date add. In this case, I want to use n. N is for minutes, that interval. We're going to add. And what are we doing? We're going to do this adding based on the send quantity. I'm adding the number of minutes. How many? And what am I adding it to? I'm adding it to the current date and times, which is now. So that's for minutes. So it's relatively easy. All I need to do is copy and paste this, one for hours, another one for days, another one for weeks, and another one for months. So now all we need to do is just change this. Instead of this, minutes is going to be hours. So if the case is hours, instead of this, I'm going to change this to H. We're going to add the number of hours. If in this case it is days, then we're going to simply change this. We're going to add the number of days. Of course, if this is weeks, we're going to add the number of weeks, which is WW. Weeks is WW. That'll add the number of weeks to whatever the current date and time is. And then the last thing is months. So it's relatively easy using the date add function. Months, in case it's month, we're going to use the M, in this case, M. All right, good. I like that. So that's good. That's all we need to do, and that's end select. So just basing it on those conditions. Okay, so now we've properly calculated the send on. Now we're ready to run. Now we're ready to add it into our email log database. So with email log database, that's the name that we've assigned it here, right inside here. Email log database, that's the name. So we're going to do something with it. Now we can simply add that information. Remember, this is the first macro. I want to add a brand new row, adding the log, the trigger, and all that information into here. The reason we're adding a row is very important, right? Sometimes we add a row, sometimes we don't. Why are we adding a row? The reason I'm adding a row is because when I run that advanced filter, we're going to have the results come. That row is going to be here too. Let's say I send that email. What I need to do is once I send that email, I need to change I need to put a sent on date. How am I going to know where the original date is if I don't have the row? That's why we bring the original row over so we can make a change. We just read the row that's based on here. We know what row to update here inside and put that sent on once the email is sent. Okay, so back inside of code. So let's just write that up and let's add that information to the database. So first of all, the email log row is equal to, of course, the first available row. So the first available row plus 1, that's our first email log row. But what is our next log ID? Remember, we put that inside notifications. We have our next log ID. It's located here in B23. So we're going to give it that log ID. That's going to give it that unique email log database row right here. It's going to be 10, which is our next available one. Okay, so let's go in and write that up right now. And that's going to be an email dot range A, and the email log row dot value is going to be equal to notification equal, let's forget equal, notification dot range. And where's it located? That's located in B23. B23 dot value. It's our next log ID. Okay, next up we have the trigger. We need to add in that trigger. Let's copy and paste this here and start making the updates. So we've got information to add. We want to add in B. We've got information we want to add in C, in D, E, F. What else do we have? We're not going to add that, not G, but we do want to add H, right? So sent on is not going to be there because we're not sending it. And then H, right? So that's going to be the last one here. So once we have that, so the C, D, E, F, not G, but we do need H. And H is simply going to be the row, right? This row is the last thing we're going to put there. So I'm just going to copy this, and we're going to paste it right in here. So that's the load. That is going to be our row, our log row. So we know the row. Okay, so what about in here? So let's put in some information. B is going to take on our trigger. Let's bring this down here so we can see the rest of it. And then also email database row. So that's going to be in C, email database row, our trigger column, and then our record ID, and then our send on, our date and time send on. Okay, so that's it. That's all we need. Now let's just fill in the value. So where's our trigger coming from? That's going to come from notifications. Our trigger is going to be located right here. We see B21 is our trigger, so we can put that inside here. So B21 is our trigger. We also have our email database row that is going to be located inside B19. B19, so we can make that change right here. And also I want to know the trigger column. That's going to come from B20. 20 is going to handle our column. And then our record ID is going to come directly from 22. So there we go, 22. Send on, that's going to be a variable that we've already calculated here. So send on. All right, that looks good. Saving our work. So that's going to get everything. So once I add everything to that, that's pretty much it. All I need to do is then run the macro that's going to check here. Check to see if anything should be run now, right? Should we check? So in this case, I'm going to run a brand new macro. We've already added everything to the database. Remember, I said there were 3 macros. So the first one simply adds the data. The second one's going to run an advanced filter. We make sure the send on is empty. We don't want to run anything. So then what we do is we're going to have those results, only those that are not been sent. Then I'm going to sort them based on the send on. Then we're going to send email. So let's write the second of the 3 macros now, and that's going to be check and schedule. So with this macro, all we're going to do, again, we had 2 dimensions here. Let's remove an extra space here. In this case, dimension, the last row as long, and also the last result row as long, is running that advanced filter. And of course, we're focused really on the email log database. So with email log database. And we're going to do something with that. And of course, we're going to clear the contents of any results. So dot range, and our results are going to come right there. You can see them N3 all the way through U, and then a large row. We're going to clear those contents, clearing any prior results. Clear contents. Okay, clear prior results. Once we have that, we can then get ready to run our advanced filter. It's going to be based on the last row. So last row is going to be equal to A. So that's going to get us the last call. Of course, if the last row is less than 3, then we can exit the sub out. And then next up, what we want to do is run our advanced filter. Okay, so our advanced filter is going to be, in this case, it's going to be based on, let's bring this out a little bit more so we can see all the code. Bring it out, maximizing the area. All right, so basically, in this case, we're going to run A all the way through H. So I want to bring our, and then our criteria is going to be right here on L2 to 3. So let's write that now. So A all the way through H. Our criteria is going to be L2 through L3, updating that L2, making sure that we have the right last row. The variable has to be the same. Last row, L2 through L3. And our results are going to come in through N through U. So N2 through U2, N2 through U2. Okay, so then of course we want to make sure that we have our last results row. So let's just do this last result row, just like we did before. Result, I'll use another auto hotkey for that. I use it all the time. It's less than, in this case, 3, exit the sub. We want to make sure there's results. If there are results, then what I want to do is I want to sort those results. Now, we've created the sort already a few different times inside this workbook. So let's find the last time we used sort, and then I'm just going to copy that. And then what I'm going to do is close this, and I'm just going to paste it down here. Okay, not there, but right here. So first of all, we're clearing the sort fields. That looks good. Not the student database. We need to update the correct database. It's going to be the email log database. And do the same thing here, email log database, because we're going to fix those databases. Okay, so we got that there. Now what are we going to sort? I want to base it on the send on. So it's going to be based on S3. And of course, I want ascending. That's the one the earliest time first. And then our data that we're sorting is going to be located from N3 all the way to, in this case, U in the last result row. U in the last results row. Okay, so that's going to sort everything quickly and easily. Once we've sorted it, then what I want to do is I want to check this send on. I want to look at this. Is that date and time? Is it before or currently the current date and time? If it is, then send the email now. If it's not, then schedule it for later. Then run the schedule to run that macro at that specific date and time. So we can do that with just an if-then statement. So if dot range S3, we're only focused on one cell, S3 dot value is less than or equal to now, then what we need to do is run this macro. Then this macro, email send, this is going to send the email. Then we're going to run that macro. Else, it's not. Else, then what are we going to do? I want to run that macro at a specific date and time, at the send on date. So how do we do that? Well, in that case, all we're going to be doing is application dot on time, right, on a specific time. What time is that? Well, it's going to be this time right here, this time right here. And what are we going to do? We're going to run. What are we going to run at that time? Well, we're going to run this macro right here, this email send. That's the macro I'm going to run at that specific time. So we're going to either run it now or run it at a specific time. Relatively easy. That's it. That's all we have to do. Very simple. So that's the second of the third macro. So now we're just on to the third macro. And you can follow this format for any type of automated emails you want to send. Okay, we'll save our work, and that's it. So once we're there, we can then run the last macro. This is it. One more macro that we need to create those emails. So let's write that right now. First of all, I wanted to mention some variables that we need for this. We're going to dimension the send to as a string. We need to know who we're going to be sending it to. I also want to know to email. Remember, we've got a CC email, CC as a string, and the subject as a string, as well as the message as a string. If there's going to be attachment, I need to know that, put that into a string. And the record ID, in this case, we can do it. Record ID, that would be the student ID, the class ID, the teacher ID, as a string. String is fine in this case. Okay, also I want to know some long variables, so we need to know the dimension, the email database row as long, the trigger column, we know the trigger column, we need to loop through those trigger columns as long, and also the email log row as long, and also the variable row. As we're looping through those triggers, I need to know which variable we're on. Variable row as long. So email log row. Good. So that's it. So also, of course, we're creating an Outlook application. So dimension the Outlook app, and that's going to be an object. And also the mail that we're creating, the Outlook email, Outlook mail as an object. Okay, so we've got that defined. Now we're going to focus really on the email log database. So with email log database, what are we going to do? The first thing what I want to do is I want to check U3, right? We need to have an original row. I need to make sure there's original row. If not, I'm going to skip and go to the no emails, just go to the bottom of the macro. So to do that, we're going to say if we need to have dot range U3 dot value equals empty, then go to no emails. And that's going to skip all the way down at the bottom here, no emails. All right, so now assuming we do have, I also want to make sure that S3 is S3. If S3, just in case, I want to check on this send 3. If it's later than the current time, then what I want to do is run that, then go to also no emails, right? Because there's nothing to be sent right now, just to double check so that we don't get any loops. So if .range S3 .value is greater than the current time, it means we don't want to send it right away, then also go to no emails. Okay, assuming that we do have, now we can move on. So first thing what I want to do is put inside our email database row. I want to make sure we put that inside here variable, capture that row, and that's of course going to be located inside U3. So we need that, so we'll just copy that. We have it here. That's going to be equals email database row. That's going to get us all the information, right? If I'm going to be sending an email, I need to know all the information. I need to know the attachments, the CC. I need to get all this information. Without that row, there's nothing we can do. So we need to know that row. That's going to be located right here in U. So that's what we're going to do first thing, email database row. Next up, once I know that email database row, I want to know the log row, right? That log row, excuse me, I'm sorry, I messed that up. Email database row is located in P. This is the original database row here. Our log row is located here. This is our log row where we need to know both. I need to know the log row because I need to know when to put the send on. Email database row located in P. Okay, got to clear that up. All right, so let's get that and put that also in a variable. Email log row database not log is located in P. Fix that. And then this is located in U, right? We need to know the log row. Okay, good. Now we got that cleared up. Inside U, that is our email log row. Email log row. Once we have that, then I can then add to that and put in the trigger column. The trigger also in a variable, trigger column is going to be equal. We see where that's located. It's located in Q. So we can put that right here in Q. We don't need the extra equals here. Q is our trigger column. I need to know that so I can loop through all of the variables. Trigger column, where that's located. Remember, just to briefly remember that trigger column is located here. What column is it located here? Is it column 15? Is it column 17, 19, whatever? I need to loop through all these variables and replace them with the actual data. But before I do that, I need to place that record ID in here, or in here, or in here, and here. So in our trigger column, +1 on row 5, I need to place that in there. So we're going to get to that inside this macro in just a bit. Okay, so now that we have the trigger column, we're going to determine the record ID. That record ID, again, it is the student ID, the teacher ID, and so on and so forth. That's going to be located right here in R. So we're going to place that here inside R. So R3 is where our record ID. Once we have that, then I'm going to place that. Now I'm going to take that record ID and I'm going to place it directly. That's going to calculate all of this. So I'm going to place it in row 5 in our trigger column +1. So in this case, it's going to be placed here or here, or the student ID or the teacher ID. You're going to place it directly in here. So let's write that now. That's inside, of course, our notifications sheet. So scroll down here a little bit. Notifications. Dot, in this case, cells. We need to use cells. And this is going to be row 5. It's going to be our trigger column +1. Dot value is going to be equal to record ID. Then what I want to do is I just want to make sure to calculate that, because I got a lot of formulas there. Notifications dot calculate. Okay, calculate everything there. That's very important. Okay, now what I want to do is I want to do the send to. Where's our send to? Now that we've calculated all this information, we've calculated this because we've just placed this in here and run the calculation. Now what I want to do is I want to grab all the information from our email database. I want to grab the email to, I want to grab the CC, the attachments, the subject, and message. I want to grab all that information into variables, because we might have to replace some of the variables. I might have to replace the student email with the actual student email, or the parent email variable with the actual email. So we need to put all this into variables, and then we're going to use the replace to change that up. Okay, so how to do that? So the first thing we want to do is get the send to, which we have in the string variable, is going to be equal to the email database dot range. Send to is located here in the email to. That's going to be column E, and the email database row. We've already defined that dot value. That's going to be the send to. Okay, what I can do is copy that. We've got a few different variables, and then make the updates accordingly. So send to, we have that. Next up is the email CC. That's going to be equal to, located here in F, column F, CC to. Next up, what we have is our attach, right? So let's put that in here. But the email CC, let's take a look here. Attach is going to be equal to located here inside G. So, all right, so we paste that. But I want to know inside G, I want to add more than that, right? Because this is just the value, the file name. What I need is I would need to know the full file path on that. So we might add that in a little bit later on, but I'm going to need to know that that's not enough because we'll have individual users, their paths are different. So we just want to separate the file name from the file path because every user has a different file path. Okay, so we have the attachments here. And next up, I want to know the subject. So we'll put in the subject, and that's going to be equal to located in H. That's our subject. And we'll put in the subject here, and then add that comment subject. And then I'm going to add in the attachment here, text. Comment that out. Okay, lastly is the message. We need to add in the message here. And then we'll put in message, and that's going to be coming directly from I. So I is where our message is. All right, so now that we have the original information, now of course we're going to need to replace any variables inside those with the actual data. So let's put in message here. Okay, so now that we have that, we're going to add in the variables. Add in variables. And how do we do that? We use that with the replace. So again, but we don't know where the variables are. We've got so many. So all we need to do is run a loop. I'm going to run a loop from 8 to 17. Anywhere I find class name, I'm going to replace it with this. Anywhere I find teacher, I'm going to replace it with this. So that's all we need to do. So let's start that loop now. For variable row is going to be equal to 8 to 17. Close our loop. Okay, once we have that, we can then use the replace. So send to is going to be equal to, again, I'm going to replace, what am I replacing? I'm replacing the current send to, and I'm going to replace it with whatever is in notifications, that's the sheet, and then we're going to use cells because both the cells, what is the row? It's going to be the variable row. And then what I'm doing is I'm going to look at the trigger column. I'm looking for this dot value. But what am I going to replace it with, right? I'm looking for this, whatever's in the trigger column. I'm going to replace it with whatever's in the trigger column plus 1, column plus 1, column 16. If this is found, replace it with this. So all we need to do is just copy and paste this, right? We're looking for this. We're replacing it with whatever's in the trigger column plus 1, right? And then close that replace. Okay, so that's it. The send to is simple. That's all we're doing. And the email is going to be exactly the same. I'm just going to copy this here and then replace the variables. So the email CC is going to be equal to the same, except in this case, we're changing email CC. Okay, now it's slightly different is the next one, the subject. Okay, so the subject, let's put in the subject here. Subject is going to be equal to the subject, but there's a little bit different. In the subject and the message, we need to change it out. What if there's a date? What if there's a time? I need to update the formats. In other words, let's say it's this date, or it's this time, or it's this time. Notice I gotta format these properly inside the email. How am I going to format that properly in email? Dates have to have a proper format, times and durations and all that, and even, amounts. So where am I going to get the format? Well, what I can do is I can use the format that's currently in there. If I take a look at this format and we go into the home and time and we go into the more number formats, we can use this format. Whatever format the cell is, we can actually format the text. So based on whatever format the cell is, we can format the text, format those strings inside that. So how do we do that? Well, the subject is going to equal the subject. We're going to replace, right, the current, what are we replacing it with? We're replacing the trigger column plus 1, but I also need to format it based on this. So I want to run a format based on this format. So how do we do that? Well, what I can do is something like this, format, and what are we going to format? We're formatting, this is what we're going to format, and what's the format of that? What format is going to be paste, the format of the current cell, number format. Now you see how I did that? So basically I'm taking the number format of this cell, whatever the format of this specific cell is, that's the format I'm going to use on this variable. So that's easy, relatively easy, just taking the format of this cell and replacing it up to date. Okay, so now that we have that, we can do the same thing for the next line. So it's going to be the same thing for the message. So in this case, message is going to be equal to this right here. Let's put in that equals and then update that equals. In this case, it's going to be message. So we're just taking the format of the cell and we're updating the string based on the current format. And we're doing that for both subject and message. Now we've got the send to, now we've got the email. Now we've taken any time we see the variable and replacing it with the actual data. And in the case of subject and message, we're also changing the formats based on the cell formats. Now we're ready to create our email. So we can do that with the following code. So everything's been done. We've changed everything out. Now let's go ahead and do that. So we're going to set the Outlook application is going to be equal to create object. What kind of object are we creating? We're going to create an Outlook application object, and that's going to be Outlook dot application. Okay, so once we've created that, I also want to create the email. How do we do that? We're going to set the Outlook mail. It's going to be equal to, in this case, Outlook application dot create item 0. Okay, and that is going to create a specific email. Now we can focus on with that email. So with Outlook mail, what are we going to do? Now I'm just simply going to assign those variables to the to, cc, and so on and so forth. So it's relatively easy if this part. So the to equals send to. So here the dot to is going to equal to send to, whatever we've done that. Now if email cc does not equal empty, then we'll use .cc. This has got to be down here. There we go. Okay, oops, almost messed it up. I knew something was wrong. Then .cc is going to be equal to email cc. Okay, I like that. So we've got the CC if there is any exists. We've got the to email. Now what we want to do is I want to write what about for the attachments, right? But I need to make sure that there is an attachment exactly. So if, in this case, attach does not equal empty, then we need to add the attachment. We need to make sure that we're right. We want to make sure that this variable is not empty. If there is a variable, then we can just add it in. Then attachments dot add, and what are we adding? In this case, I'm going to add the application folder, and what else? And we make sure that we add those email attachments. Backslash email underscore attachments. It's a folder that we created. That's where it's located. Attachments, then the slash, then and the attach. Okay, good. So we've added that attachment, but only when it exists to that email. Now we're ready to add the subject and the body. So dot subject is equal to subject, and then dot body is equal to dot message, equal to message. Okay, and then what if we display it? Are we going to display it or not? Well, that's going to be based on this notifications all the way over here. If B2 is true, display emails before sending. If B2, then dot display, otherwise dot send. So we can write that in here. If notifications dot range B2 dot value equals true, then dot display, else dot send. Okay, good. That's perfect. That's one more important thing, very important that we need to do. Once we sent that email, I need to run a little bit of cleanup, but I also need to send this send on. I need to place that current date and time on the sent on, and then it's going to make sure that it doesn't get sent again. So that's very important. And that's why we always track the row of that log database. So let's write that in right now, but let's clean up this. Set Outlook mail equal to nothing, and also the Outlook app. So set Outlook app equal nothing. Okay, now what we want to do is update that database. So we're outside the way. So dot range G, that's where we want to put the send on, and the email log row dot value equals now, current date and time now. Add current date and time to sent on. Perfect. So now all we need to do is just run that macro again. Since we now have added a send on, it's not going to add that one. I want to know the next email to send. So I want to put that next email and put it up right here so we can get it ready to send the next one. Okay, good. So that's it. That's all the macros we have to write. We can test it out. All I'm going to do is just check for errors. And now what we want to do, go back into the students. We know we've got it triggered. We know we get it. So now let's add a new student and we'll see if we have any issues with that. And let's just put Harold and then put in an email, James, and then we'll put in another email. So that's all we need. We don't need the rest of it. So we'll put in test@test.com. Okay, so now what we're going to do is I'm going to save that student. We're going to check for any errors, see if that email gets created. And we take a look at the send log and we go ahead and look at the email log here, and let's take a look. Student got created, that's good. 10:38, it's going to be scheduled 2 minutes from the current time, so that's perfect. That's the way we want it to, right? It's now 10:36, and it's created 2 minutes. The sent on doesn't exist, and the rows got created. So student created, we've got the trigger column. Let's take a look at the trigger column and make sure that that's right. Back into the notifications. The student got created here. That's 17. That looks good. So everything got created there. Okay, very good. I like the way that that looks. Now all we just need to do is wait till that current time. We know, let's take a look back inside the email log database here. We see that we have the results here. Now look at it, we have the results. Now that automatically at this time, it's already been scheduled. Our macro is already going to run at this specific time, which is in about 45 seconds from now. All right, take a look at it. Let me just, one little line of code that I missed here. This one right here. Last result row equals, okay, it's going to be based on the results. It's going to be based on n. So I'm just going to update that n. All right, let's run that and take a look at that. Okay, there's our email. KCC, I'll probably fix that. Harold, I hope you're welcome to school. Excel School, we're happy to have you here. Thanks, Fred. All right, I like the way that looks. That looks good. Let's add one more for the class. That looks very good. I'm going to add one more for a new class. So how do we do that? So go into classes here. We're going to do the same exact thing. I'm going to find some place down here. All I'm going to do is just copy the students here, copy that, go into the classes, find anywhere down here, paste that in. Email trigger, in this case, it's not going to be student created. We're going to be called class created, right? Class created. So there, and of course, we're going to be looking for, in this case, email enabled. We want to make sure, again, in this case, B32, right, the row 5, making sure, yes, it is true. If I were to change that to false, I want to make sure this goes to false. So let's look inside the email log database, go into the class. It is row 5, then sorry, email database here. Changing this to false. Should make sure to change it inside the classes. So that's what I want. Okay, going in here, false. Perfect. So that's the way I want it. So let's undo that action. We want to keep it true. Now what I'm going to do is inside the new classes, we're going to double check for that and go and add to that. So let's go ahead and just write that in inside the classes. All I'm going to do is going to copy basically what we did in the students and then just update it. So when we go into student miscellaneous here, and then the student, I'm going to add that, just copying basically student save new right here, basically. There we go. And then just update it accordingly. So going back into the classes now, let's take a look inside the classes macros here. Focused on when there's a new class, right? Existing class. So this is the new class here. New classes. So I'm going to paste that in. Obviously, it's not going to be B24. We've changed the range. This time it's going to be B32 does not equal empty. And we also want to make sure that B25, in this case, here does not equal B33, of course, has to be true. So in this case, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take notifications. I want, in this case, not going to be the student ID. It's going to be called the class ID. And where's that class ID located? In this case, our class ID is also located right here. And let's just call it B5. That's where our class ID is located. So B5. Right? B5 is what was updated here. So B5. And then we're going to change the trigger name, right? It's not, of course, student created. It's called class created, class. Saving our work. So now we have that. So now all we need to do, again, is just simply add a new class and take a look at the email. So new class here. And then just give it a class name, test. Let's just call it history 123. And then just give it a teacher, a few other required fields in this. We'll call this history, a term, giving it a specific term. From date, use just 1 day a week, year or level, and then a room here. Okay, and then the start time, just any start time, and then duration is fine. Okay, so now what we're going to do is we're going to save that class, and we'll take a look at the email. Inside the log, let's take a look to see if it's been created. Email database here, log data, class created, scheduled 10:44, right, which is 1 minute from the current minute. No sent on, right? It's already scheduled to go 10:44. Perfect, just the way I like it. Class created. All we need to do is just wait 1 minute and it'll come up. And here it is. Okay, let's take a look. History 123 has been created. Please be informed the class was created from 4. Notice the date formats are correct. To date in room 3. Thanks so much. All right, awesome. We've done automated emails. I'll add in the rest of the triggers at some point because we've got a lot, but you get the point, so we don't need to go. But I'll make sure that those are working at some point. Okay, very cool. Thanks so much for joining me for this amazing training where we have learned to create automated emails based on multiple triggers within just a few macros, and then include attachments and, of course, dynamic names and information. Amazing training. Thank you so much. We'll see you next week for part 19. All right, see you then.